Merry Christmas, Thomas. That was the last soft thing Kendra said before realizing the diamond necklace she found wasn't for her. It was for his mistress. Her billionaire husband chose to betray her on Christmas Eve, planning to leave her with nothing. He thought she was just a trophy wife. He was wrong. If his gift was heartbreak, hers would be public ruin. At midnight on New Year's Eve, while he expected a kiss, Kendra grabbed the microphone. No tears, just a red dress and a revelation that would burn his empire to the ground. Watch what happens when the quiet wife becomes the storm. The Lawson estate did not smell like pine needles or roasting chestnuts on Christmas Eve. It smelled of cold ambition and expensive freesia, a scent chosen specifically because Thomas claimed it signaled clarity of thought to his investors. Kendra Lawson stood at the top of the marble staircase, her hand resting lightly on the balustrade, watching the foyer fill with the elite of the technology world. From this vantage point, she looked like the queen of the castle, a woman who had it all, but inside her chest, her heart beat with the anxious rhythm of a stage manager, seconds before the curtain rose, on a production that was under-rehearsed and over budget. She was 36 years old, draped in emerald silk that cost more than her father's car. Yet she felt less like a wife and more like a prop in the meticulously curated showroom that was her home. The mansion was vast, modern, and aggressively impersonal, a glass and steel testament to Thomas's net worth rather than a sanctuary for a family. Every piece of art on the walls had been selected for its appreciation value, not its beauty, and tonight, Kendra was just another asset on display, polished and silent. She descended the stairs, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. She signaled the caterers to shift the champagne tower away from the drafty entrance and caught the eye of the string quartet, nodding for them to raise the tempo just enough to energize the conversation without drowning it out. This was her genius, the invisible architecture of social dominance. For 10 years, she had been the silent conductor of Thomas's life, editing his speeches, smoothing over his abrasive arrogance, and turning his chaotic impulses into strategic brilliance. He was the visionary. She was the reality that made the vision possible. But as she reached the bottom step, the air shifted. Thomas was standing near the entrance to the grand salon, but he was not looking for her. He was laughing, his head thrown back in a display of charm that Kendra knew was calculated to the millimeter. Standing comfortably within his personal space, far closer than professional etiquette allowed, was Natalie. Natalie was the new executive assistant, a title that seemed to expand in scope with every passing week. She was young, sharp, and possessed a predatory kind of confidence that unsettled Kendra. Kendra watched, frozen for a microsecond, as Natalie reached out and adjusted Thomas's cufflinks. It was a gesture of intimacy, a wife's gesture. Thomas didn't recoil. Instead, he leaned into her touch, lowering his head to hear something she whispered. The sight was a physical blow, a crack in the perfect glass veneer of the evening. Kendra composed herself, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and approached them. She needed to assert her presence, to remind the room and perhaps herself that she was the mistress of this house. However, before she could speak, Thomas turned, his eyes sliding over her, as if she were a piece of furniture he had grown bored of. He didn't compliment her dress or touch her hand. He simply gestured toward the bar, silently commanding her to check on the wine supply, before turning his back to resume his conversation with Natalie. The evening wore on, a blur of forced pleasantries and hollow laughter. Kendra moved through the crowd, accepting compliments on the decor and the food, deflecting questions about why Thomas seemed so distant. She felt the gap between them widening, a chasm filled with unsaid words and cold indifference. Then came the moment that would define the night. Senator Mitchell, a key political ally for Thomas's upcoming regulatory hearings, was holding court near the center of the room. Thomas was there, preening, eager to impress. As the senator gestured expansively, his arm struck a passing waiter, sending a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon cascading down the front of his pristine white shirt. The room gasped. Silence rippled outward from the epicenter of the disaster. Thomas looked horrified, not for the guest, but for the disruption to his perfect evening. He stared at the stain with a look of distaste, his hands hovering uselessly. Kendra moved instantly, She didn't run. She glided, appearing with a linen napkin and a bottle of seltzer water she had snagged from a passing tray. She was calm, surgical, and efficient. "Senator, don't worry," she said, her voice a soothing balm that cut through the tension. She dabbed at the stain with practiced ease. "This fabric hates heat, but the seltzer will neutralize the tannins immediately. It won't leave a mark." She glanced up at her husband, offering him a perfect segue to recover the moment. "Thomas, perhaps while I handle this, you should introduce the senator to the specifics of the Alpha Project. He was asking about the infrastructure earlier. It was a perfect assist, a lob set up for him to slam dunk." Thomas blinked, the embarrassment on his face hardening into annoyance. He didn't take the cue. Instead, he placed a hand firmly on the small of Natalie's back, pulling her forward. "Thank you for cleaning up, Kendra," he said, his voice loud enough to carry, dismissing her effort as menial labor. "Natalie, please escort the senator to the guest suite to freshen up and grab the confidential briefing from my briefcase. You know where it is." He turned back to the crowd with a charming, apologetic shrug. "My wife, she is much better at housekeeping than she is at politics." A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter moved through the circle. Kendra stood frozen, the damp napkin in her hand. The humiliation was absolute. She had offered him partnership. He had demoted her to the help. She leaned in, her voice a harsh whisper meant only for him. "I just saved the contract for you, Thomas. I saved the moment." Thomas didn't even blink. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, maintaining the illusion of a loving couple while his words dripped with ice. "You saved the tablecloth, Kendra. That is all. Don't make yourself more important than you are. Go check the kitchen. The hors d'oeuvres are running low." He pulled away, flashing a dazzling smile at a nearby investor, effectively erasing her existence. As Kendra stood there, stunned, Natalie paused before leading the senator away. She looked at Kendra, her eyes wide with a faux sweetness that was more insulting than a sneer. "You just rest, Kendra," Natalie said softly, clutching the senator's arm. "I know exactly what Thomas needs right now." Kendra was left alone in the middle of the crowd, surrounded by people drinking her wine and admiring her home. She looked down at the linen napkin in her hand, the red stain blooming like a fresh wound. She squeezed it, her fingers tightening until her knuckles turned bone white, the fabric twisting under the force of her silent, suffocating rage. She was the wife, the partner, the foundation. Yet in that moment, she realized she was entirely alone. The party continued to swirl around her, loud and bright, but Kendra felt a deadly cold settle into her bones. This wasn't just a bad night. This was an eviction notice. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was being erased from the life she had built with her own blood and sweat. And as she watched Thomas whisper something into Natalie's ear across the room, Kendra realized that the crack in the glass was no longer a fracture. It was a shattering. The silence that descended upon the Lawson estate after the last guest departed was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and pregnant with the ghosts of the evening's failures. The catering staff had vanished through the service entrance, leaving the marble floors gleaming under the recessed lighting, but the air still held the stale scent of expensive perfume and the lingering tension of the scene with the spilled wine. Kendra Lawson walked through the empty grand foyer, her heels clicking softly against the stone, a solitary rhythm in the cavernous house. In her hand, she clutched a small square box wrapped in midnight blue velvet. Inside sat a Patek Philippe watch, a masterpiece of engineering she had spent months sourcing, engraved on the back with the date of their 10th anniversary. It was a peace offering, or perhaps a bribe, a tangible attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between her and Thomas. Despite the humiliation she had endured earlier, a foolish, persistent part of her heart still clung to the hope that once the audience was gone, the man she had married might return to her, stripped of his arrogance and the pressures of his empire. She made her way toward the east wing, where Thomas's private study was located. The hallway was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long and distorted against the walls. As she approached the heavy oak double doors, she noticed one was slightly ajar, spilling a slice of golden light across the carpet. She slowed her pace, intending to knock, to offer a soft smile and the gift. But a sound froze her in her tracks. It was laughter, light, breathless, and unmistakably female. It was followed by the clinking of crystal glass, a toast made in the intimacy of a room that was supposed to be Thomas's sanctuary for work. Kendra moved closer, her breath catching in her throat, stepping into the shadow of the doorframe. Through the gap, the scene unfolded with the clarity of a high-definition nightmare. The study, usually a place of cold business transactions, smelled of cigar smoke and aged cognac. Thomas was sitting in his leather armchair, his tie loosened, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. But he wasn't alone. Natalie was there, perched casually on the arm of his chair, her body angled toward him, with a familiarity that made Kendra's stomach turn. Then Kendra saw it. Draped around Natalie's neck, catching the light from the desk lamp, was a diamond necklace. It was a delicate cascade of stones that shimmered like captured starlight. Kendra stopped breathing. She knew that necklace. She had seen the invoice in Thomas's jacket pocket 3 days ago. She had remembered the rush of relief she felt when she saw the price, thinking that, despite his distance, Thomas had planned a grand gesture for her, an apology in the form of diamonds. Now she watched as Natalie fingered the stones, her face flushed with triumph. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was a theft of her narrative, a hijacking of the affection she thought she was owed. Kendra watched paralyzed as Natalie leaned down, her voice carrying clearly through the crack in the door. "But what about her?" Natalie asked, tilting her head toward the hallway, feigning concern. "If she makes a scene? If she sues for the assets?" Thomas let out a scoff, a sound devoid of respect or affection. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes lingering on Natalie's neckline. "Kendra," he said, the name sounding foreign and distasteful on his tongue. "She loves the title of Mrs. Lawson too much to do anything reckless. She's comfortable. She signed the prenuptial agreement 10 years ago without even reading the fine print because she was so blindly in love." He chuckled darkly, setting his glass down. "Besides, the timing is handled. After the new year, once the assets are quietly moved to the Cayman Trust, I'll file. I'll toss her out with a small allowance. She won't have the resources to fight me." The words hit Kendra with the force of a physical blow, shattering the last remnants of the woman who had walked down the aisle 10 years ago. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. It was a calculated, cold-blooded demolition of her life. Something inside Kendra broke, but it didn't shatter into tears. It hardened into something unbreakable, cold and sharp. The trembling in her hands ceased. She looked down at the velvet box in her hand, the symbol of her devotion, and realized how pathetic it was. She didn't retreat. She didn't run to her room to weep into a pillow. Instead, she pushed the heavy oak door open. She didn't knock. She walked into the room with the steady, ominous grace of an executioner. The sudden movement startled them. Thomas jerked his head up, but significantly, he did not push Natalie away. His hand remained resting possessively on her waist. "You're spying on me?" he snapped, his initial surprise instantly morphing into aggression. Kendra walked to the desk, her face a mask of terrifying calm. She placed the velvet box on the mahogany surface. The sound it made, a sharp, dry click, echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I just came to bring you your Christmas gift," she said, her voice steady, stripping away every ounce of emotion. "But it seems you were already busy opening the gift you actually wanted." Thomas looked at the box, then back at her, his eyes narrowing. He didn't apologize. He didn't scramble to cover up. He leaned back, crossing his legs, embracing the villainy he had been hiding. "All right, you've seen it now," he said, his tone dripping with challenge. "So what now? You want to cry? You want to scream? If you want to keep living in this villa, if you want to keep your credit cards and your social standing, you will learn to be silent. You will accept Natalie. Don't make me kick you out sooner than I planned." Natalie looked at Kendra, her fingers still playing with the diamonds, her expression a mix of pity and victory. But Kendra wasn't looking at the mistress. She was looking at the man she had dedicated a decade of her life to, seeing him truly for the first time. He was small, he was cruel, and he was carelessly arrogant. He believed she was weak because she had been kind. He believed she was stupid because she had been trusting. Kendra felt a strange sensation wash over her. Not despair, but clarity. Absolute, crystalline clarity. The love she had harbored evaporated, leaving behind a vast, empty space that was quickly filling with high-octane fuel for what was to come. She straightened her spine, looking down at him with eyes that were dry and burning with a new, dark intelligence. "Thank you for the Christmas gift, Thomas," she said softly, her voice devoid of the tremor he expected. "You just gave me exactly what I needed. The truth." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the watch on the desk, leaving the room, and leaving behind the person she used to be, stepping into the hallway not as a victim, but as a woman who finally knew exactly who the enemy was and exactly how to destroy him. The days sandwiched between Christmas and New Year's Eve descended upon the Lawson estate like a thick, suffocating fog, a period of time where the normal rules of engagement seemed suspended in a gelatinous haze of pretense. To the outside observer, and most importantly to Thomas, Kendra Lawson had retreated into the shell of a defeated woman, drifting through the cavernous hallways of the mansion with the hollowed-out eyes of a wife who had accepted her displacement, playing the part of the obedient, broken spouse with a dedication that would have garnered a standing ovation on Broadway. She poured his coffee in the mornings with a steady hand, listened to his transparent lies about emergency board meetings that coincided perfectly with Natalie's gym schedule, and offered no resistance when he made passive-aggressive comments about the housekeeping, all while her mind was sharpening itself into a weapon of mass destruction. Every silence she offered him was not submission, but calculation, a tactical retreat designed to lower his defenses until his arrogance blinded him completely to the knife she was slowly unsheathing. When Thomas finally left for the office on the 28th of December, confident that his wife was busy weeping over photo albums or shopping for validation, Kendra didn't cry. She shed the silk robe of the grieving wife, dressed in a nondescript trench coat and sunglasses, and drove her secondary car, a sedan she hadn't used in years, to a part of the city where the Lawson name held no currency. Her destination was a rundown diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place where the air smelled permanently of frying grease and stale cigarette smoke. The kind of establishment Thomas would rather die than be seen in, which made it the perfect headquarters for an insurrection. Sitting in a booth in the far back corner, shielded by shadows and the flicker of a dying neon sign, was Samuel Pierce. He was a man who wore his intellect like armor, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that looked violently out of place against the cracked vinyl seating. As Kendra approached, Samuel was engaged in a ritual of nervous precision, removing his wire-rimmed spectacles and polishing them with a silk handkerchief, his movements slow and methodical as he stared at a thick manila folder resting on the sticky table. He looked up as she slid into the booth, his eyes wide with a mixture of concern and professional anxiety, clearly expecting a distraught woman seeking alimony advice. But what he saw in Kendra's face made him pause mid-motion. She didn't order coffee or make small talk. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out not a tissue, but a high-performance laptop, flipping it open with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Samuel murmured, sliding his glasses back onto his nose as he watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, bypassing standard login screens and pulling up a terminal window that was a cascading waterfall of green code. "Kendra, we can do this the standard way. Discovery, subpoenas, forensic accountants. It takes time, but it's safer." Kendra didn't stop typing, her eyes reflecting the scrolling data as she accessed the deepest layers of the Lawson Technologies mainframe. "We don't have time, Sam," she replied, her voice low and devoid of the tremor that had plagued her just days ago. "Thomas is moving fast. He thinks he's erased his tracks because he controls the admin passwords, but he forgot one crucial detail." She hit the enter key with a flourish, and the screen shifted, unlocking a hidden directory labeled Phoenix. Samuel leaned in, his brow furrowed in confusion as he tried to decipher the complex strings of data. "What is this? How do you have root access? Thomas changed the security protocols last month." Kendra allowed herself a dry, humorless chuckle, the sound of a creator looking at a flawed creation. "He thinks he's a genius, Sam. He thinks he built that company from the ground up with his charisma and his handshakes. He forgets who sat up with him until 4 in the morning 10 years ago, writing the core algorithms for the financial tracking systems. He forgets that I taught him how to read a balance sheet." She tapped the screen, highlighting a block of code that looked like gibberish to the untrained eye, but was poetry to her. I wrote the original code, Sam, and like any good architect, I built a backdoor, a master key that bypasses every firewall he paid millions to install. He never found it because he never thought to look. He underestimated me then, and he underestimates me now. The screen flashed red, pulling up a series of unauthorized transfers that had been buried under layers of shell companies and consulting fees. Samuel adjusted his glasses, squinting at the figures, and his breath hitched in his throat as the magnitude of the theft revealed itself. "Dear God, Kendra," Samuel whispered, his finger tracing the lines of the ledger on the screen. "Look at these dates. Look at the amounts. He's been draining the liquidity for 6 months." He pointed to a recurring transfer of 7 figures heading to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $50 million. He's moved $50 million into a blind trust under the name N. Vance. The realization hit them both simultaneously. It wasn't just greed, it was a severance package for his old life and a dowry for his new one with Natalie. "He's gutting the company," Samuel continued, his voice rising with professional outrage. "He's robbing the shareholders, the employees, and you. He's dismantling the empire piece by piece to hide the assets before he serves you divorce papers." Kendra stared at the name N. Vance glowing on the screen, the digital proof of her husband's absolute moral bankruptcy. She didn't feel the sting of heartbreak anymore. She felt the cold, hard weight of ammunition. Samuel looked at her, his face pale, realizing the sheer destructive power of what sat on the table between them. "If we release this, if we trigger the failsafe embedded in these bylaws, Kendra, you realize what will happen? You won't just hurt him. You'll destroy the stock price. The board will panic. The SEC will swarm in like locusts. You will crash the entire company." He looked into her eyes, searching for hesitation. "Are you sure you want to burn the house down? You helped build it." Kendra closed the laptop slowly, the glow of the screen extinguishing to leave her face in the shadows of the diner. She looked at Samuel, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, a smile touched her lips. Not a smile of joy, but the terrifying razor-sharp smile of a predator that has just closed the trap. "I'm not burning the house down, Sam," she said, her voice steady and final, ringing with the authority of an empress reclaiming her throne. "I'm just taking back my bricks, every single one of them, and I want him to watch me do it." She stood up, smoothing her coat, the transformation complete. The grieving wife was dead, and in her place stood the architect of ruin, ready to bring the ceiling down on the heads of those who had tried to bury her. The grand ballroom of the city's premier hotel was a kaleidoscope of gilded excess, a fitting stage for the crowning moment of Thomas Lawson's career. 500 of the social elite, tech moguls, and political power players swirled beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, sipping vintage champagne and waiting for the clock to strike midnight. Thomas stood at the podium, bathed in the flattering glow of a single spotlight, his tuxedo impeccably tailored to hide the rot beneath the surface. He was mid-speech, his voice booming with the charismatic baritone that had charmed investors for a decade, speaking of vision, integrity, and the Lawson legacy. Standing just off-stage in the wings, visible enough to be seen, but shadowy enough to be deniable, was Natalie. She wore silver, shimmering like a second-place trophy, her eyes fixed on Thomas with a look of proprietary smugness. The crowd was captivated, drinking in the lie, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. Kendra Lawson had not entered through the VIP entrance. She had waited until the speech was reaching its crescendo to make her appearance at the top of the grand staircase. The heavy oak doors swung open, and for a moment, no one noticed. Then a hush rippled through the back of the room, spreading forward like a wave of cold water. Kendra was not wearing the demure pastel tones Thomas preferred, the colors of a wife who blended into the wallpaper. She was wearing red. It was a gown of crimson silk that clung to her frame like liquid fire, structural and sharp, with a neckline that was both elegant and dangerous. It was the color of a warning sign, the color of blood, the color of war. She didn't look at the guests who parted for her as she descended the stairs. Her eyes were locked on the stage. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline. But her face was a mask of terrifying serenity. She was terrified, yes, but the terror was distant, eclipsed by the sheer, intoxicating power of the button she held in her hand, concealed within the folds of her clutch. Thomas faltered. He saw the shift in the audience's attention before he saw her. He trailed off in the middle of a sentence about family values, his eyes tracking the gaze of the front row until they landed on his wife walking down the center aisle. His smile didn't drop, but it tightened, his eyes narrowing into slits of furious confusion. He hadn't expected her to come. He had expected her to be at home, weeping over the divorce papers he planned to serve on January 2nd. As Kendra mounted the steps to the stage, the click of her heels audible over the low murmur of the crowd, Thomas stepped away from the podium to intercept her, blocking her path to the microphone with his body. He leaned in close, maintaining the rictus of a loving husband for the cameras, while his voice dropped to a venomous hiss that only she could hear. "What the hell are you doing? Get down! Don't embarrass me in front of the board." Kendra didn't flinch. She looked up at him, and for the first time in their marriage, he looked small. The fear that had governed her life for weeks evaporated under the heat of the stage lights. She sidestepped him with a fluid grace, reaching out and taking the microphone from the stand before he could react. The feedback whine pierced the air for a split second, silencing the room completely. Thomas lunged to grab her arm, but she turned to the audience, her voice projecting clear and steady, amplified to every corner of the ballroom. "My husband just spoke about transparency in the future," she said, her voice devoid of the trembling that used to define her interactions with him. "I think there is no better time than New Year's Eve for us to be transparent about everything." Thomas froze, his hand hovering in the air. He looked toward the sound booth, signaling frantically to cut the audio, but the technicians were locked out of their own system. High above the stage, the massive LED screen, which had been displaying the Golden Lawson Technologies logo, flickered. The code Kendra and Samuel had injected into the system executed with ruthless efficiency. The golden logo dissolved, replaced instantly by a grainy, high-definition video. The room gasped as one entity. It wasn't pornography. It was something far more damning for a room full of investors. It was footage from the hotel security cameras at the Ritz-Carlton, time-stamped 3 days prior, showing Thomas handing a thick envelope to a government regulator, a clear, undeniable act of bribery. Before the shock could settle, the image shifted. The screen was flooded with bank statements, blown up to 10 feet tall. The account names were highlighted in neon red, N. Vance Trust. The transfers were scrolling rapidly, $5 million, $10 million, $50 million, siphoned from the company accounts into offshore shells. The silence in the ballroom was shattered by the sound of glass breaking. Somewhere near the front, a board member had dropped his drink. Thomas spun around, staring up at the screen in horror, his face draining of blood until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat. He clawed at his tie, shouting something unintelligible, but he was drowning in the evidence. Kendra turned her back on the screen, facing the man who had underestimated her for a decade. She gestured to the wings where the spotlight operator, following the pre-programmed sequence Kendra had overridden, swung the beam of light away from the stage and pinned Natalie against the velvet curtains. Natalie shielded her eyes, exposed and trembling, looking less like a mistress and more like a deer in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. The crowd turned, hundreds of eyes judging, analyzing, and realizing the depth of the deception. The giant digital clock above the exit began its final countdown. 10 seconds to midnight. The room was in chaos, voices rising in a cacophony of shock and outrage. But Kendra felt a profound, bell-jar silence. She stepped closer to Thomas, who was paralyzed, watching his empire disintegrate pixel by pixel. She brought the microphone to her lips one last time, her voice soft now, intimate, yet amplified enough to be the epitaph of his career. "You chose her on Christmas Eve, Thomas," she said, her eyes boring into his, seeing the ruin reflected there. "So on New Year's Eve, I chose myself." 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year, ex-husband." She dropped the microphone. The thud reverberated through the speakers just as the clock struck 12. Confetti cannons exploded from the ceiling, showering the room in gold and silver glitter. a grotesque celebration raining down on the wreckage of Thomas Lawson's life. As the band confusedly struck up Auld Lang Syne, Kendra turned and walked off the stage, her red dress blazing like a flame moving through the smoke, leaving Thomas standing alone in the center of the stage, surrounded by falling glitter and the ashes of everything he had ever built. The chaos that erupted in the wake of Kendra's exit was not the festive jubilation of a New Year's celebration, but the discordant panic of a sinking ship. The band, confused and terrified, continued to play a jaunty rendition of Auld Lang Syne, the melody clashing grotesquely with the cacophony of shouting voices, shattering glass, and the relentless, strobing flash of unauthorized camera phones capturing the fall of a titan. Kendra did not look back at the stage where the giant screen was still looping the damning evidence of Thomas's financial hemorrhage. She walked straight into the shadows of the wings, the heavy velvet curtain sweeping shut behind her, severing her from the noise of the ballroom like a guillotine blade. Here, in the dim industrial lighting of the backstage corridor, the air was cool and smelled of dust and electrical wiring, a stark contrast to the perfumed suffocation of the gala. Samuel Pierce was waiting for her, flanked by two stone-faced men in dark suits and a uniformed officer, their presence a silent confirmation that the legal trap had snapped shut exactly as planned. Kendra's heart was still racing, the adrenaline flooding her system with a chemical high that made her fingertips tingle. But her face remained a mask of imperious calm. She was no longer the wife. She was the executioner, and the blade had already fallen. Before she could reach Samuel, the heavy curtain was ripped aside violently. Thomas stumbled into the corridor, his face slick with sweat, his tie askew, and his eyes wild with the manic desperation of a cornered animal. He lunged for her, his hands grasping at her bare arms, his grip bruising in its intensity. "Kendra, you've lost your mind," he screamed, his voice cracking, stripping away the polished baritone of the CEO to reveal the terrified man beneath. "You think this is a victory? You just incinerated the stock price. You destroyed the company. If I go down, you lose everything too. We are husband and wife. For God's sake, we can fix this. We can spin this." He was shaking her, trying to physically rattle the obedience back into her, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape hatch from the realities she had just imposed upon him. Kendra did not struggle. She didn't scream or pull away in fear. She simply looked down at his hands clutching her red silk sleeves, her expression one of mild distaste, as if she had spotted a stain on a tablecloth. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached up and peeled his fingers off her arm, one by one, dropping his hands to his sides as if they were covered in filth. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, dusting off the invisible residue of his desperation. "You are mistaken, Thomas," she said, her voice dropping to a conversational volume that forced him to stop shouting to hear her. "We stopped being husband and wife the moment you bought that necklace. Right now, we are business partners. Or rather, we were." Thomas stared at her, his chest heaving, trying to process the shift in her demeanor. "Partners? You just tanked our partnership on live television." "I simply exercised my fiduciary duty," Kendra replied, stepping closer to him, her heels clicking ominously on the concrete floor. "You see, when I wrote the original incorporation bylaws 10 years ago, I included a founder's ethical clause. It states that any executive officer found engaging in embezzlement, bribery, or moral turpitude that endangers the company's reputation is subject to immediate termination without a board vote, provided the majority shareholder triggers the clause." She paused, allowing the words to sink in, watching the realization dawn in his eyes like a horror movie villain, realizing the call is coming from inside the house. "I activated the clause 3 minutes ago, Thomas. You aren't the CEO anymore. You've been fired." You, you can't," Thomas stammered, backing away until he hit a stack of road cases. "I am the face of Lawson Technologies." "You were the mask," Kendra corrected coldly. "I was always the brain." She nodded to Samuel, who stepped forward with the efficiency of a grim reaper in a three-piece suit. He handed Thomas a thick envelope, while the men behind him, federal agents specializing in corporate fraud, moved into position. "The freezing orders for your accounts have already been executed," Samuel said, his voice devoid of pity. "Your assets, including the offshore trust in the Caymans, are under federal lock and key pending the investigation into the bribery charges you just broadcast to the world. Thomas looked from Samuel to the agents, and then back to Kendra, his arrogance finally collapsing into a pile of ash. "You planned this," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of hatred and awe. "You sat at dinner with me? You smiled at me, all while you were holding a knife to my throat. You are a cruel, evil woman." Kendra leaned in close, so close she could smell the fear radiating off him, mixed with the expensive scotch he had drunk to toast his own success. She didn't blink. "No, Thomas, I am not cruel. Cruelty is spending 10 years making a woman feel small so you can feel big. Cruelty is building a future on the back of someone you intend to discard." Her voice dropped to a whisper that was sharp enough to draw blood. "I am just the woman you underestimated. Goodbye, Thomas." She turned her back on him. As the agents moved in to read him his rights, a commotion erupted near the loading dock exit. Natalie had tried to slip out the back, hoping to disappear into the night. But the press had anticipated the exits. The flashbulbs were blinding, a swarm of paparazzi descending on the mistress in the silver dress. Kendra walked toward the exit, her path taking her directly past the chaotic scene. Natalie looked up, her mascara running, her face a portrait of humiliation, and locked eyes with Kendra, silently pleading for mercy or acknowledgement. Kendra didn't break stride. She didn't sneer, she didn't smile, and she didn't speak. She simply looked through Natalie as if she were made of glass, rendering her completely insignificant. It was the ultimate dismissal. Kendra pushed open the heavy steel doors and stepped out into the cool, biting air of the new year, leaving the wreckage of the empire behind her in the dust, the sound of sirens rising in the distance to mark the end of an era and the beginning of her reign. 6 months after the glitter had rained down on the ruins of Thomas Lawson's empire, the sun was shining with a relentless, golden intensity over the city, illuminating the glass facade of a refurbished warehouse in the Arts District. This was not the sterile, imposing glass of the Lawson mansion, designed to keep people out. These were floor-to-ceiling windows meant to let the world in, flooding the open concept space with natural light that nourished the vertical gardens lining the brick walls. This was the Nexus Hub, Kendra's new kingdom, though she preferred to think of it as a garden she was tending. The air inside didn't smell of cold ambition or stale cigar smoke. It smelled of fresh espresso, damp earth from the plants, and the electric hum of collaboration. Everywhere Kendra looked, she saw women, women of color, women from underfunded neighborhoods, women with brilliant minds who had been dismissed by the Silicon Valley Boys Club, coding, debating, and building the future on their own terms. Kendra walked through the space, not with the anxious, perfectionist gait of a wife trying to avoid criticism, but with the grounded, rhythmic stride of a CEO who owned the floor she walked on. She stopped to review a line of code on a junior developer screen, offering a suggestion that unlocked a problem the team had been stuck on for hours, her mind sharp and finally utilized for a purpose that fed her soul rather than draining it. The glass door to her private office slid open with a soft hiss, admitting Samuel Pierce. He looked different, too. The perpetual tension that used to tighten his jaw during their clandestine diner meetings had softened, replaced by the relaxed confidence of a man who had won the biggest case of his career. In his hand, he held a copy of the Financial Times, rolled up like a baton. He didn't need to announce his arrival. Kendra sensed him, turning away from the window where she had been watching the city traffic below. She leaned against her desk, crossing her arms, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "You're late, Sam," she noted, though there was no bite in her voice. "The board meeting for the scholarship fund started 10 minutes ago." Samuel chuckled, tapping the newspaper against his palm. "I had to make a detour. I thought you might want to see the morning edition. It's official." He unfolded the paper and laid it on the desk. The headline was not screaming, but its placement below the fold was an insult in itself for a man who used to dominate the front page. Former tech mogul sentenced, suspended term and bankruptcy for Lawson. The article detailed the final humiliation. Thomas avoided prison only by pleading guilty to every charge and liquidating every asset he had to pay restitution. He was free, but he was destitute, barred from serving on a corporate board for 20 years. The photo accompanying the article showed a man who looked 20 years older than the husband Kendra had left on New Year's Eve, his shoulders slumped, his face gaunt and shadowed. Kendra looked at the image, waiting for a surge of emotion, pity, anger, satisfaction, but she felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger or a character from a book she had finished reading a long time ago. "He called my office this morning," Samuel said quietly, watching her reaction closely. "He wanted to know if you would meet with him. He said he has closure he wants to discuss. Maybe a settlement on the intellectual property rights you retained." Kendra didn't hesitate. She picked up the newspaper, her movements languid and unbothered, and walked over to the recycling bin in the corner of the room. She dropped the paper inside, watching it settle among the discarded drafts and coffee cups. "No," she said simply. "Tell him I'm busy, and tell him that the past stays in the trash where it belongs." She dusted her hands off, a physical gesture of finality that mirrored the emotional door she had welded shut. "I don't need closure, Sam. I have a company to run." Samuel smiled, a look of profound respect in his eyes. "I'll draft the refusal letter, but," he checked his watch, a playful glint entering his eyes, "you might want to leave early today anyway. I noticed a reservation on your calendar for 8 p.m. at Le Cuckoo. That's a bit fancy for a client meeting, isn't it? Is this a new business partner I should vet?" Kendra turned back to the window, catching her reflection in the glass. She saw a woman in a vibrant cobalt blazer, her hair natural and free, her eyes bright with a light that came from within. "No, Sam, not a business partner," she said, her voice softening. "It's a date." "A date?" Samuel raised an eyebrow, feigning shock. "Kendra Lawson, making time for romance?" "It's not romance yet," she corrected him, checking her reflection one last time, adjusting her lapel. "It's just possibility. He's an architect. He builds things that last. And more importantly," she turned to face Samuel, her expression serious but radiant, "he's a man who knows that women are not ornaments to be displayed on a shelf. He knows I take up space, and he doesn't want me to shrink." "That sounds like a good start," Samuel nodded. "Go. The scholarship fund can wait until tomorrow. The world won't end if you take a night for yourself." Kendra grabbed her purse and walked toward the door, pausing as she passed him to squeeze his shoulder. "Thank you, Sam, for everything." She stepped out of the office, moving through the bustling hub of the Nexus, the sound of women's voices rising around her like a choir of progress. She walked out of the building and onto the sidewalk, the evening sun hitting her face with a warm, golden kiss. The city was alive, noisy and chaotic, but Kendra felt a profound stillness at her core. She put on her sunglasses not to hide, but to look directly into the glare of the future. As she merged into the stream of pedestrians, a thought echoed in her mind, a final verdict on the last 6 months. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, a destructive force that leaves you hollow. But as Kendra felt the pavement under her feet and the freedom in her lungs, she knew they were wrong. She hadn't sought revenge. She had sought correction. "I didn't destroy him," she thought, the ghost of Thomas Lawson fading into the background noise of the city. "I just let the truth weigh what it weighed." "They say revenge is sweet," her internal voice mused as the camera of her mind pulled back, framing her as just one powerful woman among many, marching forward. "But I don't think this is revenge. This is justice. And justice. Justice tastes like freedom." Kendra Lawson turned the corner, disappearing into the vibrant tapestry of the life she had designed for herself, leaving the screen to fade to a resolute, absolute black. And that brings us to the end of Kendra Lawson's journey, from the shadows of betrayal to the spotlight of her own freedom. Now I want to turn the microphone over to you. Do you think Kendra's public takedown was pure justice, or was it too ruthless? Did Thomas deserve to lose everything, or was the punishment too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read your perspective. Thank you so much for tuning in and experiencing this story with me. If you enjoyed this ride, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. Until next time, take care and remember, You are the author of your own life. See you soon.